Hi, everybody. My name is Krause. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Philanthropy Together. I've been on emails with a lot of you for the summit, so thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Isis. And I'm Adriana Garcia, Program Officer with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I work with the Philanthropy and the Philanthropic Partnerships team focusing on collaborative philanthropy.
The session that we're going to do for you this morning is called The State of Collaborative Funds. We know folks are coming into this work having been in the sector for decades. Some, Laura here 6 months in this field. So folks are coming in with all different understandings of what are collaborative funds? What does this field look like? What's the scale and the promise and the impact? And so we'll be sharing a number of stats with all of you to help ground this, building on the traditions of philanthropy and community philanthropy that have been going on for decades.
Thank you for that, Isis, for acknowledging those histories and reminding us of those traditions as well. So for this State of the State, we're going to have a number of folks joining us up on stage. We're going to go pretty quickly. And these are all going to be folks who are going to be sharing some key data and facts and information from their vantage point in the field. So these are meant to be snapshots. They're not going to go deep into the issue. We're really hoping that this gives you a preview to what we're going to be covering more in depth in the journeys, the collective genius sessions, and the collab sessions that you'll be experiencing throughout the summit. And just a reminder, if you want to take any notes during the sessions, these handy, beautiful booklets that you received have space for all of the sessions for you to take your notes. So for this State of the State, you can find us on page 14 through 15. I know I've been using that note page a lot. So we're going to get started with Alison Powell, partner at the Bridgespan Group, and Wendy Castillo, Associate Director of Philanthropy Research at Bridgespan. Please join us. Yeah, join us. So as many of you are well aware, Bridgespan has been conducting a Gates-funded annual survey of collaboratives, and really have been capturing the size, focus, and unique characteristics of collaborative funds. So most of you here are familiar. I'm just going to kick it off right to you, Alison, if you can get us started by talking about the role of Bridgespan more precisely in this field.
Thanks, Adriana. And I thank you to the Philanthropy Together team and to Gates for bringing us all together. This is just an incredible gathering of folks, kind of celebrities in my book. So I feel like I've had many of your emails. We've been harassing you for years with the survey, so apologies and thank you. But I'm Alison Powell, a partner with Bridgespan. I'm based in our San Francisco office. And for those folks who aren't familiar with Bridgespan, we're a nonprofit ourselves. We do a lot of consulting work directly with philanthropies, nonprofits, and then publish a lot of research in the sector. And I'm one of the co-leaders of our philanthropy practice. In the past couple of years, this field of collaborative giving has really marked a significant shift in the focus of our work. So we get to work with donors and support them in finding and researching amazing collaboratives to be funding. We get to work with many collaboratives, many in this room, on their strategies over time. And then we get to work with a lot of the amazing NGOs who are receiving often quite significant gifts. And so this has just been something that we've been really privileged to be both an actor and a support, and then also along the side of a lot of research. So for the past 2.5 years, I've been working closely with Jen and her team at Gates to really try to understand the landscape of this sector. So we've been doing, as I mentioned, and as Wendy will go into more detail about this survey, and that's led to, I would say, 2 things. First, research that's really intended to be in service to funds and vehicles and the collaboratives doing the work, and really helping you understand how to see yourself, the diversity of this field, where you're similar, where you're different, what you can learn from each other, and best practices. So that's really kind of the number one focus. And I think a secondary focus is really to be of service to donors who are trying to learn and find organizations to fund. And so what you'll see from our research is both kind of publishing the insights and the landscapes, but also a set of resources like lists, reports, et cetera, background documents to help donors really find funds. Because when we started this work, 5 to 7 years ago, there was no one place where people could look to kind of find and sort organizations they might even think to fund. So that's been the focus of our work. And then I think Adriana later today will talk a little bit about some of the work that Bridgespan teams in some of our global offices. So we have local teams in our Johannesburg, Singapore, and Mumbai offices doing work in partnership with Gates to try to understand the context of collaborative philanthropy in those contexts. So you'll hear a little bit about that later. And unfortunately, those colleagues couldn't travel to be with us today. But we're really excited to share some of the preliminary findings of our 2023 research, and I'll turn it back to Adriana.
Thank you, Alison. Thanks for your leadership and all of your work in this field. I'm going to turn it right back to you, Wendy. I think the audience would love to hear about some of the highlights and the methodology used in this research. So if you can get us started with that.
Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Wendy Castillo. As Alison said, I work with Bridgespan, and I have had the privilege to do this survey this past 2 years. So before I get started, I just want to let you all know that if you're interested in going deeper on this, please just feel free to contact one of us, and we can talk about more opportunities for that. But this will be an overview. So over the last 3 years, at some point in time, 279 collaboratives, unique collaborative funds, have filled out our survey. And this past year, 170 funds filled it out. It was also the first time that it was both in English and Spanish to be more inclusive. These collaborative funds have distributed between $34 to $44 billion since their founding. And in total, they've contributed between $4 to $7 billion annually. To put this in context, this is about 10% of U.S. foundation giving, and about 2% of U.S. philanthropic giving overall annually.
Thank you so much, Wendy. For those of you who are in this field, entrenched in the work, these numbers are no surprise. You are doing this work. You know this well. And we hope to get this information out more widely to highlight the success and promise of funds. We need to get this information out. Collaborative funds work. Wendy, can you share just a little bit more about the findings, really dive into that and what you found to really differentiate collaborative philanthropy in this larger ecosystem?
Of course. I'm going to talk about 3 elements that really differentiate collaborative funds from the broader philanthropic field. First, their global nature. Second, their issue prioritization areas. And third, their equity lens. So, in terms of geography, respondents indicated that they have staff in 87 countries. And more than 30% of respondents said that they support more than one region. In terms of issue prioritization, we asked respondents to select one priority issue area. They could select as many as they would like for secondary priority areas. But in terms of one primary area, here are the top 5. Climate, gender equity, civic engagement and democracy, racial justice, and global development. And to demonstrate the intersectionality of these issues, as our previous panel stated, the median number of secondary issue areas was 6. In terms of the equity focus, I'm going to talk about the what, the work, the who, the leadership, and the how, the decision-making processes. In terms of the what, 40% of funds said that racial justice was at the core of their work. It was at the core of their mission. And similarly, 33% said that gender equity was at the core of their work. In terms of the who, 66% said they have Black, Indigenous, people of color leadership. And as the panel just mentioned, we understand the importance of disaggregating this data, and it is going to be part of our future research. 70% are women or non-binary led. And in terms of the how, when we asked funds, how is decision making made in terms of who gets the money and how it's distributed, most people cited that they used an internal management team. However, 39% also cited that some part of their decision-making processes use participatory mechanisms. And this is almost double of the 20% of foundation staff that do. So I've presented some really exciting data that shows the equity focus of these funds. However, when we look at the larger funds, those who have greater payouts of about 25 million, we see the same barriers to capital as those we observe in the broader sector. These funds are less likely to be led by people of color, less likely to be led by women, and less likely to use participatory mechanisms. So although I've presented a lot of exciting work, there's a lot more work to do and more work to learn from each other.
Thank you so much, Wendy. What great data. I think that's why we're all here, right? We see collaborative funds as doing things differently than traditional philanthropy. That's opening up such an amazing opportunity. But let's talk a little bit about the opportunity. Can you tell us more about the potential overall?
Yeah, thanks, Isis. So I want to just highlight 3 things. First, in our research, we ask each of the funds, when were you founded? And I love that Philanthropy Together has that chart with the sticky dots outside to kind of get some more data there. But what we noticed is that over 62% of the funds who responded to us have been founded since 2010. So there's just momentum. There's more organizations. Second, more money. So there were about 100 funds that answered our survey in 2022 and 2023. Thank you. And of those funds, the vast majority are either at the same giving size or more. 90 out of 100 have grown or stayed the same. And they've given 13% more resources, year-over-year growth. So that's great. There's more funds, more money, everything. But what's the potential? The most exciting stat, I think, for us is when we ask you all, what could you do if fundraising was not an obstacle? And folks indicated they could move $17 billion annually. And this is about a 2 to 4 times. Yes, thank you. It's all of you doing this work. It's 2 to 4 times what you're moving now. And that's just the folks in our survey. Right, and they're probably comprising, half, if not less than half, of the folks actually around the world doing this work. So we just see incredible potential and are so excited to have this time together the next couple of days to work with you all on how to attain it.
Thank you so much, both of you, Alison, Wendy. And I heard some people starting to clap. We should clap for that. 17 billion. Yes. Thank you. You could just sit here. So thank you so much for that bird's eye view, Wendy and Alison. I'm going to hand this over to you. And now we want to start to dive in a little more. We want to zoom in and take a closer look. Grab your mics. We are now welcoming to the stage Jess Tomlin, co-CEO of Equality Fund, Yasmin Madan, Director of Philanthropic Collaboration of Co-Impact, and Peng, CEO of Just Fund. So welcome, all 3 of you. Yasmin and Jess, I'm going to start with you. I know both of your funds were fueled by a desire to more effectively contribute to systemic enduring change through these models. Equality Fund received a $300 million capital transfer from the Canadian government in addition to significant investments from other government and philanthropic partners. And Co-Impact, Yasmin, has mobilized more than $785 million from a diversity of funders across 31 countries, more than half of which was through a gender fund. Both of you are on track to raising more than $1 billion for gender equality. As the largest collaborator around the gender equity space launched around the same time, what are your ambitions and how do you see your strategies as complementary? That's for you, Jess.
Thank you. Testing. Thank you very much. It's so good to be here. Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be on the stage with these amazing folks. Certainly, the government of Canada made a singular bet, which was that if they injected significant scalable resources into feminist movements, that would invite encourage, motivate, mobilize net new funding to go to gender equality in net new ways. And that was a bet that was made in 2020, and it has brought along and incentivized folks from around the world to give in this way. I would say that Equality Fund is one example. There are women's funds in this room. There's the Black Feminist Fund. There are some incredible organizations who are doing a lot of what we're trying to do, which is to really accelerate, amplify, and motivate net new funding for this work. And the reason for that is because the current state of philanthropy, moving to gender equality writ large, pales in comparison to the billions upon billions, and that's just what we can count that is moving into the anti-gender and the anti-rights movement. So the Equality Fund was born out of an idea that we needed to be able to scale investments and move investments across the entire continuum of capital, injecting resources into grassroots organizations, hyper-local organizations, national organizations, regional organizations, multilateral spaces, online, where harm was being caused and rights were being rolled back. And if we were to be able to inject that capital across that entire orbit of actors fighting to both hold ground and break ground, then we would stand a chance to sustain the damage that is being caused right now in the very ferocious anti-gender movement.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. Is the mic working? Thanks, Jess. This issue of gender equality is so deep and entrenched, right? It's not going to take one single solution to solve it. It's going to be addressing across issue areas. That means shifts in norms and mindsets, as well as shifting systems that just shape our everyday lives, basic things of health, education, economic opportunity that we have. And actually, to do that well, we have to do what Jess is talking about, which is bottoms up, really shifting those norms and mindsets, but also top down, shifting policies and shaping systems. And that means using this feminist funding approach as well as shifting governments. And the money we're talking about for that should be sustained, it should be flexible, it needs to be long-term. And no single philanthropy can solve this. So when you say one of the strategies, it is that if we actually come together and pool those resources, if we leverage funding from other philanthropists towards these issue areas, that is collective agency of women and girls, it's issues that address women's rights, it's women's leadership, all of that, if we pool our resources together, we're actually going to be able to do this at the scale of the problem. It's not enough to show what works if it only works for a few. It has to work for everybody, and we have to design for scale right from the start. But we also just talk about philanthropy, and I think starting with that example of the Canadian government, but also in the countries we work. So co-impact is primarily in the global south. And governments today are spending billions of dollars to provide health services, to provide education, to create livelihoods and job opportunities for people. But gender isn't part of that. They're actually gender blind, or in many ways gender harmful. So we have to use philanthropic funding to actually unlock that public and market financing, and that's when we're going to have systems change. So our funds are trying to address gender equality, and we absolutely want to bring in new funders and new monies and get philanthropists to work together for that scale of the problem. But the vision towards is actually unlocking public and private financing so that that change is sustained over time.
Yeah, I think I would double click on that. And what we're learning at Equality Fund as we design and build, and I just wish to be clear about this, we're quite new. We're learning a lot as we go. We are completely participatory. We are accountable to activist movements and consider ourselves as part of those movements themselves. And we are learning as we go and as we design and build. We used to say, we are learning how to fly the plane while we fly it, or something like that. And then the government people were like, please don't say that. Makes us very uncomfortable. So we have to think of a new analogy. But I would say we are learning as we go. And what has been incredible is that the folks around the table, funders, individuals, institutional relationships with Ford and others in the Gender Funder Collab ecosystem, you know, our activist partners, our board, everybody has a real skin in the game. That there is it hurt everybody. The amount of money hurt. The requirement of engagement really required people to show up, and that has felt really different. And what we're learning is, because of our scale of impact, is that we are able to demonstrate that you actually cannot do democracy well. You cannot fight climate justice well. You cannot engage across the entire ecosystem of human rights work and the devastation that's happening around the world if you don't apply a gender lens. And so what I think we're learning as funds that are scaling and have really big fundraising ambitions is that everything will be more transformative when viewed through an intersectional lens, including your investment portfolios. We, as the Equality Fund, have, I think, what is now the largest gender lens impact investment in the world. And I'd like you all to know that when the markets tanked, ours, and everybody's investments sucked, ours sucked less. So, there's something to say. There's something to say for that, right? There is a real positive story here around how we can do better.
And just last point, and I'm so thrilled to be on stage with Equality Fund, because I think what unfortunately happens, particularly with funders when you show up, is they tell you, tell me how you're different. Tell me what's unique about you. And actually, that's not the question we should be asking. We should be asking, tell me how you collaborate. Tell me how you actually complement each other. And we complement each other because the ambition is too big for us to compete. And I'm thrilled with the vision and the mission of this. So thank you very much.
Thank you both so much. That was so inspiring. Yara, I want to pass it to you now. Yara is the founder and CEO of Just Fund, a nonprofit grant-making platform created by funders and organizations of color to move more money to organizations at the front lines of social and racial justice. Who here is on Just Fund, uses Just Fund? Okay, awesome. Great to see that. Yaya, you have such a unique vantage point of the ecosystem. Can you share a little bit more about what you're seeing?
Yes, and hi everyone, I'm Yara, and I do have a unique vantage point because we have 149 funds across the United States who use Just Fund to run their grant cycles. Funds like New Breath Fund, Atti Zhang over here, and Maya from New Breath Fund. I see Emergent Fund in the room, Sharing Our Power Foundation, Constellation's Culture Change Fund. Because these funds are choosing to use the common grant application on Just Fund, they get to make it simple and easy for applicants to access funding, not just from their own foundations, but from 149 other funds. And making that simple and easy is really important because it frees them up to do the transformative work that's required when it comes to moving money. If we can take care of the transactional side of grant making, they then have time to do the relational, really transformative side that's required to actually build trust and ultimately move that money to communities that need it. So we have 149 funds on the platform. They've moved $250 million together to thousands of organizations, but I want to drill down into the collaborative funds. And of the collaborative funds on Just Fund, we have 38 of them. They're moving disproportionately the majority of those dollars. So disproportionately, you see the collaborative funds moving 84% of the dollars on Just Fund. That's $210 million, right? They're able to get money in and move money out. Why? Because they are in proximate relationship with the communities that they serve, right? This isn't just a transaction for them. This is deep, this is meaningful. Atti Zhang knows the communities that he is resourcing. He knows the leaders and their families and what they need. So this is a different way of giving, and we're seeing really incredible work happening from these collaboratives, and they range, right, from $160,000 to $66 million. The average size of these funds is $5.5 million, or you can take the median and look at $2.3 million. So they don't seem big in light of hundreds of millions of dollars that some funds have, but they are doing such incredible, meaningful work because of their deep relationship in communities. And if you want to know where the money flows, we can tell you because they're using the common grant application on Just Fund. We have lots of data. We know where the money's going, and it's flowing to Black and brown communities. The number one community that's served is the Black community. 64% of the dollars flow to Black communities, and they're flowing in the U.S. South. We're a U.S.-based platform. doing domestic grant making, and the majority of the money flows to U.S. South. So for those of us who are doing domestic grant making, we know how unique that is and how proud we are. We say here in the U.S., so goes the South, so goes the nation, and it's really encouraging to see the money flowing to our U.S. South. And, you know, the organizations that are being funded, well, they're small. They're under $500,000 in budget size. That's the majority of how and where the money is going, to communities that really need it, to communities that have been chronically underfunded, historically excluded by traditional philanthropy. These collaborative funds have the power, they have the trust, and they have the relationships required to move the money to these communities. And the need is real. I mean, we heard from Alison earlier that they identified a need by polling the collaborative funds of $17 billion. I'll say, every time a funder runs their grant cycle through Just Fund, they ask, what's your need for every applicant? So each of the 11,000 applicants on Just Fund tell us what they need. That need is $20 billion, right? Just those 11,000 organizations here. So when you think about these collaboratives that are ranging in size from 160,000 to 66 million with an average budget size of $5.5 million, a lot of them are running open grant cycles. Right, they're saying, come one, come all, we want to know what you need. And they're only able, maybe they get 300 applications, but they have the resources to fund 15. And they can't fully fund all of those groups, but they know where the money needs to go, and they know how to get it there. So imagine if we could actually pour more resources into these collaborative funds who have those proximate relationships and know what the communities need.
Thank you so much to all three of you. Thank you so much, Iara. Thanks, Yasmin. Thank you, Jess. I just want to emphasize that point once more earlier. Wendy and Alison highlighted that collaborative funds in the survey identified that they could push out $17 billion to the field, $17 billion to the field. And Iara just connected the dots. There's an identified need of $20 billion. So let's activate that money. Let's make that happen. I'm really glad that just in this state of the state, while you're getting these snapshots, we're starting to connect the dots. We're gonna bring up our next guest. Welcome, Atti, Worku, Co-Chief Executive Officer at the African Visionary Fund, and Dr. Fang, Vice Chairman and Secretary General of the China Development Research Foundation. So before we jump to you, Atti, I want to share some preliminary findings on the collaborative ecosystem in the African continent from Alison and Wendy's colleagues at the Bridgespan group. These are the offices in Africa. These colleagues couldn't join us today. So they found that the landscape of collaborative efforts in Africa is vibrant. No surprise there, with several examples of multiple actors working together on multiple issues: education, gender equity, healthcare, economic development, among other issues. The research shows an increase in collaborative philanthropy in Africa over the last 20 years, which is mirrored across the globe in terms of the growth we're seeing in collaborative funding. And uniquely, 70% of the identified collaboratives in this research are funded at least in part by African funding coming from the continent. Also interesting to note that there's a distinct set of first movers leading this field in Africa, often offering longer term, higher risk tolerance. This group is essentially an ecosystem asset that is strengthening the field at large. So Atti, I want to move to you. Now that we have this background, just a little preview here, can you tell us a bit about your work at the African Visionary Fund?
Thank you. Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Atti Worku. I'm the co-CEO of the African Visionary Fund. Our work is to move unrestricted multi-year grants to African-founded, African-led, and African-based organizations that have been chronically underfunded over, I guess I could say, since philanthropy has been a thing, or development. I think there's some data there you can see. One of the things that really made us want to start this work is seeing from the global dollars that go into the continent, overall, whether that's American philanthropic dollars or general global development dollars, less than 5%, most of the time less than 1% of that money goes into locally led organizations. So that's the area that we're trying to change. And the work we're doing currently, we're also relatively new. We've been around since 2020. We have currently about 25 organizations we fund across 11 countries. We will be closing our first fund at the end of this year and launching a new one. When we did our open application system, which really opened up the kind of floodgates last year because we were doing referrals before, we saw the need is much greater. So we had over 850 organizations apply for funding, and their budget sizes were all the way from starting $5,000 all the way into the millions. But the biggest thing we saw is most of them are under $100,000 budget. Over 600 of the organizations are under $100,000 of budget, and there's a significant funding desert that is making it impossible for these incredibly strong and resilient local organizations to grow because they don't get enough funding. And there's also the sector challenge that we were talking about earlier. So what we do is we provide unrestricted and multi-year funding to organizations in multi-sectors. And those sectors end up being generally health, education, human rights, technology, and some other emerging sectors. And being flexible in that way and being able to meet the need of the organizations on the ground has been an incredibly strong learning experience for us, and glad to see all the data here today of how much money is moving into collaboratives, because I think we can help change the way money is moving because of our interest in and accountability to the leaders on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Atti. There's clearly so much work happening afoot in Africa and so many other regions from around the globe. If you represent a fund that is here from not the US, so-called US, please raise your hands so we get a sense for all of the global folks in the room.
Awesome.
Okay, that's incredible work. And that goes straight back to what Wendy and Alison were saying around how staff members are also all around the globe. Our next session, Journeys, has 4 different global speakers sharing their insights and stories. So hopefully, if you want to learn more about any of these regions, take a look at that page and you'll be able to dive deeper. One example of a place that has huge potential of collaborative funding and is gaining a lot of traction is China. As evidence to that, we have a delegation here of almost 20 folks from China. Can you all raise your hands for us? Welcome in here. Wonderful. Dr. Fang Jin, can you tell us a little bit about collaborative funds and the philanthropic ecosystem in China overall?
Thank you, Isis, for having me to share the Chinese perspective. Philanthropic development in general is still nascent in China. The total giving is about 0.17% of GDP. But its growth has been quite notable in recent years. For example, total giving doubled in size between 2010 and 2020. And as recent as 2016, China only ranked in the bottom 10 measured by a World Giving Index out of 140 countries, but it has risen to 39 in world ranking in 2022. So in recent years, we do observe a emerging trend of funders working together to put the resources together to work on complex issues that often require scale in investment, for example, in environment protection, poverty reduction, and disaster relief. In a recent research report sponsored by the Gates Foundation, it defined collaborative philanthropy as focusing on creating strategic long-term solutions to social challenges, bringing in diverse stakeholders to take coordinated action under a shared vision, shared strategy, and structured decision-making mechanism. So the practice of pooling resources and working together is not new, but the concept of deliberately calling for coordinated thinking and action is. So the report also translated the term collaborative philanthropy into Chinese literally as co-building philanthropy, which makes a lot of sense in Chinese context. By highlighting this key message, what this term is trying to convey. So instead of, rather than collaboration in a very general sense, but to trying to work together to trying to find or co-build long-term strategic solutions. So that's why I think the potential for growth of collaborative philanthropy in China is huge, because the country is going through very rapid economic and social transitions. We have a lot of complex social issues we need to tackle with. So firstly, for example, the approach to convene different stakeholders, such as funders, operators, nonprofits, and policymakers, are very, very important in the Chinese context, especially given that we have a very centralized, for example, we have a very centralized political system. So engaging the policymakers is very, very important if we want to effect policy change. And also pulling funding together also allows for a deeper dives into issues instead of just projects, and also focusing on long-term strategic solutions to all these complex social issues.
And we know that you're a leader in the early childhood education space in China. Can you share a little bit about that context collaboratively?
Yes.
Co-buildingly.
Actually, early child development, ECD, is a very good example to illustrate the usefulness and need for collaborative philanthropy. We don't have such a system in China. Right now, the general public and the government have not yet reached a consensus on whether to provide this ECD service, especially to disadvantaged communities yet. So my foundation, China Development Research Foundation, CDF, has been doing research and policy advocacy on ECD based on our pilot programs in rural China. And increasingly, we find the need to bring all these important stakeholders, including funders, together to try to achieve our objectives. So starting in 2020, we established such an endowment and have been successful so far in securing funding from 12 major donors, including private individual donors like Ray Dalio, Bridgewater Associates, and corporate donors like Apple, HSBC, Taikang Insurance from China, among others. So we now have ample funding, about 200 million RMB, which is about $30 million US. We used proceeds from the returns of that endowment to support ECD research in China. And because of more funders have approached us, and because of this the concept, after being acquainted with this concept, we're now conscious about donor engagement, about governance structure, about trying to bring more stakeholders to achieve our objective. For example, rather than focusing our traditional model of ECD delivery in rural China, we're now expanding our efforts to raise public awareness on this issue. Well, recently we have invited several other key players on ECD in China to form a working group to share best practices, to raise public awareness, and also lobby government to take action. Whereas in the past, we often compete for resources and work independently from each other, but now we're working together. So in summary, I think collaborative philanthropy has a great future in China. So on behalf of the Chinese delegation, we're all very enthusiastic about the prospect, and we look forward to learning and working with all of you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Big round of applause for Atti and Dr. Fang Jin. Thank you. Next up, we have Dave Bowermaster, Senior Communications Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Adam Pisoni, an entrepreneur and funder himself. Welcome to the stage. All right, so we have already heard a lot of stats out here, and I think one of the biggest ones that landed, for me at least, was the $17 billion promise number, that the collaboratives in this room and elsewhere can move the money. We just have to get that money to them, right? So how do we actually do that? Welcome to the stage, Dave. Would love to share, if you could share a little bit about the message testing work you've done with donors, and what have we found?
Yes, thanks, Isis. And hi, everybody. Yeah, this key aspect of collaboratives that everybody has identified is this gap between this enormous capacity that all of you have to take in more funds and distribute it where it's needed most, and the need, as Iara identified, of $20 billion. So donors obviously are key. So how do we motivate them to actually take interest, spend money, and invest it in the collaborative? So we decided, we have our theories, but we wanted to find out from donors themselves. So we conducted some research. We did a survey of 150 donors who are actively engaged in philanthropy, and we asked them, basically. And it provided a lot of helpful insights with the biggest context I think we always come back to is donors do not live and breathe philanthropy as all of us do. I think if any donor had the opportunity to come and hear even the data that has been presented so far, there'd be huge motivation. They don't have time, they are very busy, and we need to reach them quickly. So, we asked to start with, what do you know about collaboratives and how do you feel about them? A top line, very encouraging piece of data was that there's a lot more awareness than we expected. It is not at the level of concepts like donor-advised funds or private foundations, but there is strong awareness, and even more importantly, a lot of interest in favorability towards the concepts of collaboratives. So there's a very good, strong base, and then we tested a narrative that we have used on our own website, which we encourage you all to go to describe at a basic level what collaboratives are, how they work, and why they exist. Once people heard that narrative, the favorability went up by 15 to 20% across most of the groups we surveyed. So people just hearing about the concept and learning about it more has some very immediate impacts.
Thank you, Dave. That's super useful information. Now, I think the audience is very eager to hear, what were your main takeaways in regards to this messaging?
Yeah, there are some very specific things that clearly came through in terms of what resonated most. The concept of just being in community with other donors and sharing knowledge and learning from one another was the highest thing that really resonated with people. Another was just the opportunity to invest at scale alongside others and not having to hire their own staff, hire their own experts, and be able to leverage their resources alongside others is very attractive. Also, just the ability to make very big bets on complex issues and have impact at scale, which they cannot do on their own. Again, these are very basic concepts to all of you that work in this space, but they really do resonate well with funders. A couple things that came up as, I would say, red flags a little bit is vague language about having impact at scale, which we all kind of know the code for what that means. People do not, that don't, again, live and breathe philanthropy, don't resonate with that quite as well. Or even the term grantee, a lot of people were confused and did not know what that is. So be careful of kind of the philanthro speak that we all are very used to. And a couple of things that I would say just as takeaways, and we are going to put out some more of the findings from these results because we just got these pretty recently. One is, as I said, be very specific and clear about what it is you do. Have very concrete examples of success and the things that you work on. And mostly talk about your work. I know we all get very busy in doing the work and implementing strategies, but I'd say that the main message that we take away from this is that when people learn more about collaboratives, when donors specifically learn more about this concept, it really resonates and people do make changes in their giving and give more. So if nothing else, talk about it.
Thank you so much, Dave. We'll make sure that everyone gets that research and one-pager whenever they're available. Adam, we want to turn it to you. You are one of those donors that Dave is talking about. Can you share a little bit about your journey into funding collaborative funds?
Sure, yeah. Many years ago, I personally began to become pretty disillusioned with what I saw in philanthropy. I saw that there were a pretty narrow set of people and ideas that seemed to get a lot of the money, but I would meet others that were just super smart with great ideas that struggled to get any funding. And if they did get funding, it could be pulled away like that, just so quickly. And it was obvious to me that as long as we had a relatively ideologically homogenous group of people deciding who got funded, we would end up with this funding concentration. And so I went around just asking people, there has to be a better way, and couldn't find anything. And then just a couple of years ago, some of my trusted advisors came and said, well, have you heard about community-led collaborative funds where the funding decisions are made by people in the community and not by the donors? And I hadn't, and I was incredibly excited, but also a bit frustrated. I was excited because it was obvious to me that these had the potential to solve a lot of the problems that I saw in philanthropy. They could operate at the ecosystem level because they were part of the community, encouraging collaboration over competition between the grantees. They could build infrastructure. And what I saw was that they truly were diversifying who and what was getting funding. So that was all really exciting. What was frustrating was that here I was, such a prime candidate to give in this way, who had never heard of them. And in fact, I had previously given to community-led collaborative funds without knowing what they were, without understanding that they weren't just another set of interesting nonprofit organizations doing good work. They represented a different class of giving, a class of giving that has the potential to fundamentally shift philanthropy away from such a donor-centric model. So in 2023, which is the first year that I've been really shifting my giving, I've shifted over 60% of my giving to community-led collaborative funds where I don't get to decide who the ultimate recipient is. And that number will go up next year because I believe in it so much. But furthermore, I've been working with Philanthropy Together and with Rebecca Darwin in the back there to try to find other donors, because donors like me, who I think just aren't educated, because I know a lot of funders probably don't love this idea, who think they're the smartest people at the table and it's their money and therefore they should decide where it goes. And I think we could waste a lot of energy and time trying to convince those people who probably can't be convinced at this point. But I also believe there are enough donors who are just waiting to be educated, who are looking for a more effective way to be in community, that we can move a lot more money to collaborative funds. And as we've seen, I think there's so much more impact that we can have and so much we can do to shift away from this donor-centric model of traditional philanthropy by moving more money into community.
Thank you so much. Huge round of applause for Dave and Adam. Awesome. So if this topic interests you, that you actually want to fill this $17 billion promise that was just shared, one of the collabs later today, led by Panorama and two incredible collaborative funds, will be diving into that. What would it look like to have some shared messaging or a shared campaign to actually reach these donors and advisors and try to move that funding? So make sure to check that out along with all the other incredible collabs. That's it. That's our State of the State. Hopefully did everyone learn something new that they didn't know before? Okay. Great, that's what we wanted to hear. And we also recognize that there's countless funds and funders who are not here and who didn't get this message, and so we'll do our best with everybody here to figure out how to get some of these stats out in the broadest way possible. And I think we can put up here next, in terms of next steps here, if you want to be part of the Bridgespan survey that Wendy and Alison shared, click on that QR code. If you want to get on Just Fund with Iara, find her and talk to her over lunch, or also you can click this QR code if you'd prefer to do that. And then one other group that we didn't have on the stage here is Giving Compass, who themselves has a whole directory and list of hundreds and hundreds of collaborative funds, including all of the funds that exist at community foundations and women's funds and the like. So that's a great resource for all of you to be able to find all of the funds out there for partnership, or if you're a funder and donor in the space, to then fund them.